Hello everyone, welcome back to Fanblade Instruments. This week we are talking about frets. This is a roll of fret wire, and I'm going to cut it up and I'm going to stick frets in this neck. There's a lot to get through here, so strap yourselves in. We're going to get pretty in-depth into this process. The first thing we need to do is fill in all of this grain pattern so that we have a nice smooth surface across the whole board. If we don't fill those in, then they'll only just be a trap for dust and sweat and grime, and fingerboards get dirty enough as it is without giving the dirt actually somewhere to live. So we're going to sand all of this off nice and smooth, then we're going to seal it. I like to use Superglue. I do use sanding sealer for most of the other grain in the neck or the headstock or the body or anywhere else. But specifically for the fingerboard, I like to seal it with Superglue because that's going to give a nice hard finish, and it looks good and it works well. So we'll do that. Then after that's sealed, we can widen the fret slots, shape the frets, and hopefully bang them in. I'll explain a lot of this as we go, so stick around. We're starting with 220 grit, and we're going to work up to 600. We don't really need to do any more than that, because when we put the finish on, we'll raise some fibres, and then we'll let that soak in, and then we'll sand that off, and then we'll put a few more coats on, and then we'll hopefully buff it up to about 1200. Should be about right. Okay, now we're getting ready to seal this. There's a couple of points about using Superglue on here. The first is that wood is a sponge. It's going to soak up any liquid that you throw at it. It's going to soak it in. So we give it a coat of Superglue. We wait 30 seconds. We give it another coat. We wait 30 seconds. We give it another one. And that first layer is going to be soaking into the wood, and you can pile quite a lot in, and you get a nice thick hard layer all over your fingerboard. That doesn't work on subsequent coats. Once that first coat, hopefully you've got it nice and thick, once it's fully cured, you come back and sand, and then you're just adding more layers to the top. It's not going to soak in. So that first layer, you give it as much as you can, and then let it cure, and the subsequent layers, you just give it a little bit. The other thing worth noting is that I'm using non-branded dollar store Superglue. Actually, it is branded. It's full strength brand, whatever that means. I believe it costs $2 for a thing. I buy it in bulk. But it's CA glue. Now, the CA stands for cyanoacrylate. Acrylate being a plastic thing. I'm not a chemist, so I don't fully understand that, but I can get that the cyano part of that refers to cyanide. So as the stuff is curing, it's putting off cyanide gas. Ventilation, gloves. You can't be too careful with this stuff. I've got the door open and the fan blowing, so let's do this. Now, as you apply the glue, some of it will want to go into the fret slots. You have to make sure there's no sawdust in the slots because they'll fill up pretty quickly. So I just use that saw to clean the sawdust out prior to applying the glue. And you can see here in this high-speed shot that glue is just soaking straight into the wood. In reality, I'm leaving it about 45 seconds between coats, but you can see it just soaks in. That's exactly what we want to see, and it makes for a nice hard playing surface. Okay, I think that's probably enough. I've used about half a bottle, which is how much is that? It doesn't say how much. One shoe. I've used one shoe's worth of glue. We'll wait 24 hours for that to set, and then we'll carry on. In the meantime, let's do some things to the body.
We're going to start with the pickup cavities. In order to get those where I want them, I need to know where they're going to be in relation to the neck and the bridge. So I'm marking the positions for those two, and then measuring the spacing for the pickups.
It says stainless hardened. I'd say that's hardly stainless. That shouldn't happen.
Next, we're just going to make a little template for routing the cavities.
Okay, so it's the next night. The camera died while I was routing that pickup hole, but that's alright, I've got another one to go. We're going to sand this down now. This is perfectly dry. We've got some 600 grit, and we're just going to polish this up and start applying subsequent coats. Like I said, we want to fill in all of that grain, so even though the wood won't soak up the finish, it'll sort of sit on top, and that's what we want. So let's do that.
Now it's time to route the second pickup cavity. I'm just using a standard bit. I'm not using any kind of flush trim bit or anything like that. What I am doing is I'm staying about 1 millimeter away from the template until I've got the depth of the cut to the level where I can ride the bit against the template. And then once I've done that, I simply chisel out the middle and then come in with the router to clean it all up a little bit. I think what's happened here is that we've routed to exactly the level of the glue joint. That one, I don't know why that's different. That should be exactly the same. Maybe if we went just a tiny, tiny half a millimetre more, we'd hit the glue, but we've definitely broken through in that one. It's in the pickup cavity, not a big deal. It's a good hole. Okay, now I don't want to cut the neck cavity just yet. There's still work to do on the neck, and if I go with these markings, which you probably can't see, but the neck's going to be ever so slightly smaller, and we want that to be a nice tight fit, so I'm not going to do that yet. What we can do, though, is contour most of the body, probably stop around about here, because like I say, I want to get that neck cavity in there before I do too much to that area, but I'll definitely get the curves in here, a bit of arm relief, a bit of stomach relief, and cut a control cavity. Yeah. I'm just using my fingers to mark a line around the outside and then transfer that onto the edge, and then I'm going to clamp the body down and come in with the Shinto rasp and carve the body. My sadistic side is telling me I'm going to leave that there. But as usual, common sense wins out. And I'm just using a little bit of 80 grit sandpaper on the detail sander just to take all those file marks out and make the thing look nice. I'm not going to sand it any more than that because there's still quite a lot to do to this body, so I'm just roughing it for now, and we'll smooth it out later. Cutting the stomach relief is pretty much exactly the same process. Just mark out pretty much where you want it to go and then carve it out. There's no exact science here. This is more of a sculpting exercise. This is more of the art rather than the science. But don't worry, we've got plenty of science coming. So just a few words about where you want to put the knobs and sort of what knobs you should have on a bass. It is my philosophy that a bass should have a blend control and a master volume, as opposed to having a volume for each thing. I found in practical use as a bass player, being able to set your tone
and then turn the whole lot down is a lot better than what they do on a jazz bass, where you've got a volume for this one and a volume for that one, and you have to readjust your sound every time you want to turn your instrument down. It's just not practical at all. It's the one bad thing about jazz basses. The one bad thing. I love everything else about them. So what we're going to do is master volume, blend to sort of pan between the two, and then a tone knob. Exactly where they're going to go I have yet to figure out, because we don't have a lot of room here, so I want to get them as close to the edge as possible. Then we'll drill some holes, and then we'll come in from the back and carve out the cavity.
Drilling 7mm holes to accommodate the shafts on the pots, and then I'm going to flip the body over and come in with a Forstner bit and just carve away as much material as possible. It's a really good way of getting rid of a lot of material quickly, which we kind of need to do to this body because it is quite heavy. It's a bit heavier than I was expecting at this stage, so I'm probably going to make the control cavity a little bit larger than I need to. Drilling the holes for the pickup wires is pretty straightforward. I just use a very long 6mm auger bit. The neck pickup is a little bit more complicated because even that long drill bit won't get enough of an angle to get all the way down to the control cavity, so I have to undercut through into the bridge pickup cavity. But you can check that you've got the holes meeting up in the middle with a torch. For the ground wire, you need to give yourself plenty of room to cut in on an angle. That means that you need to start vertically and gradually work the drill bit down, making a little bit at a time until you're on the right angle to drill straight through. Now it's time to check in with the neck. I've had a timer going off every half hour to remind me to go and add another layer of superglue, so it's just about time for sanding, and then we'll get stuck into the frets.
Okay, so that's about as good as I think we're going to get it. It's not too bad. It's not completely filled, but it's certainly looking pretty good. That's good enough for me. Nice and smooth. Let's put frets in it. Okay, so this is the fret wire we're going to be using. This is copper nickel, which is a copper nickel alloy jumbo base fret wire. Pretty good stuff. The pretty standard stuff on most instruments will have it. I do like stainless steel fret wire. I don't have any, so I'm using this. What we need to do is we need to find a saw blade that's exactly the right width for this. Now, the saw blade that I've already cut the tangs with, that measures 0.4 of a millimeter. So that's good, but it's not wide enough. We need to measure this, but we need two measurements. We actually need the measurement of the tang and the width of the barbs that are on it. So, let's measure those. The width of the barbs is, what's that? It's pretty much dead on 1 millimeter. So 0.4 of a millimeter is just not quite going to do it. But the width of the tang itself is just the tang. Just the tang. That is coming in just on 0.5 millimeter. So what we need is a blade that is between 0.5 millimeter and 1 millimeter. So here is a coping saw. Its blade measures
about 0.8 of a millimetre, which is perfect. So let's cut some fret slots. The technique here is just to drag the blade over the slot that exists. It should centre itself and cut its own groove away from the edges of the existing slot, and then once it's got itself seated you can saw down a little bit further. The depth of cut is very handily exactly the same width as the coping saw blade, so as soon as the blade goes below the surface of the fingerboard I know that I've cut deep enough and that's where I stop, and I just make sure that I've done that all the way along the length of each slot, and you won't have any problems. Okay, so those slots are nice and wide now, they're just the right width. What's happened because of the direction of the grain and the direction of the cut, and possibly because it's impregnated with superglue, we've raised a burr on one edge of the cut. That's happened on probably, I don't know, 80% of the frets. So we'll go through with a needle file and just carefully take that down. Not too much, we don't want to take off any more than we need to. And we want to make sure that these the slots are clean. Anything that prevents the fret from going all the way in and staying in is something we want to get rid of now. So that we're going to be doing a lot of cleaning up. I'm just using a toothpick and a vacuum cleaner to make sure I get any remaining debris out of the slots. You don't want anything in there, you want them as clean as possible. And if your slots look like this, then you're all good to go. So the first rule of making videos for YouTube is press the record button. As you can see, I've cut all of these up. I thought I was filming it. Sorry about that. None of these are pressed in yet. We've got a lot of work to do to them before we actually do that. They require a lot of cleaning up. Let's see if I can get this in focus. What we need to do is trim off that sharp corner. We're actually going to come in with a nibbler, they call it, for a sheet metal nibbler, and just chip off a little bit of that tang, and then we'll file it down, and hopefully that should be ready to be banged into place. Okay, so trimming the fret ends is pretty simple. I've just got a sheet metal nibbler, just a handheld one, and I have taped a piece of steel just onto the edge of it so that the fret will sit level as it's in there, and then you just take off about 3mm worth of the thing. There we have a nicely trimmed fret. Will require some filing. Will require a little bit of filing to get that straight and flat, and I'm not that worried about the end being sharp just yet. We're going to file all of those off once it's on the guitar, but that tang, that needs to come out. both ends of every fret. Just like that. We've got our frets, we've got our neck. Let's bang them in. Now, it's worth noting that experienced luthiers will be looking at the side of this mallet and thinking, "No! Don't do it!" Don't worry, I'm going to use that one instead. Now, the whole idea here is that we've got the slots as clean as possible, and we're going to be checking the slot to make sure it's clean before we bang each fret in. We've got the frets as straight and clean as possible, ready to go in. So we're just going to sit it in there. And tap it lightly. The idea is that this is going to just seat in the hole, and that'll be that. If you have to bang the thing in, then you haven't prepared the fret or the hole right. So, lightly tap it in. If it doesn't go in all the way first time, you might be able to pull it out, clean the slot, rework the fret. It should just go in clean. Just like that. And that's about where we'll leave it for this week before this video gets completely out of hand. We've made some good progress, but there's still a wee ways to go, so hit the subscribe button and check out how it finishes. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next week.